Hi and welcome to another video. So today what we're going to be doing is adding authentication to our application. So in the last video we did build just a simple landing page where we have these two links there. You can log in and sign up. Now what you're going to do today is take it a step further and add authentication to our application. Now this is a culmination to a video series that I'll be doing for the e-commerce React project. So now to add authentication to application, we're going to be using a state manager, and for this case, I'll be using Redux. Now, Redux is one of the most popular state managers out there, um, and there are many, of course, which work better than Redux, but I find Redux working best for me, which I've used quite a lot. And in here you see we have this documentation. We're being told that Redux is predictable, centralized, debuggable, flexible, and all that good stuff. Now, why would you or anyone use Redux or any state manager in their application? Now, with building an application, if it's just a simple application like this one, now you don't need to add a state manager or to have a global state to your application. It's because it gets really complicated with implementation of Redux, as you will see in a bit. But the main reason is when you're passing down properties from child or from parent components to child components and also to other child components. Now there is a need for having a centralized or a global state from which we can pull some data flow, and this state should be available in our entire application. So as your application scales up, then there's need for having a global state which will be managed by a state manager, and for this case we'll be using Redux. So to get started with Redux, if you go to the installation tab, all you need to do is npm install Redux. Oops, what the hell? Yeah, so all you need to do is npm install Redux, and it will install the latest version of Redux, and you can use yarn depending on your package manager. So to follow along, all you need to do is to go to this GitHub repository, and I'll make sure to leave a link to that in the description section below. And in here I've given you a sneak peek of what authentication really is, just some definitions there, and down here I have some libraries and frameworks that I will be using throughout this project. Now this is a Django project, so I will be linking the authentication part with a Django based backend. So if you're not really familiar with Django, I highly recommend that you watch some of the beginner tutorials with Django, since some of the concepts might be quite overwhelming if you are an absolute beginner. So to start off with, we'll need I need to go back. So we're going to need the Django REST framework, and in here you can go ahead and read about that. And inside the Django REST framework, we'll be using token authentication. Another cool package we'll be using is Django Auth. I opened that in another new window. It should be new tab. And Django REST Auth. Now, for our UI library, we'll be using Semantic Ui, and I can't highly recommend this to anyone who is starting out in React because it is quite simple to use, easy, and to get started, what you need to do is just install it and install the CSS as we did in the last video. So I'm not going to go over the basics as we did that in the last video. Now, inside the Django REST framework, and again, this is their documentation. You can go and read through. Now, if we go to the home tab, we need to see how we can install that. But let's start off with the front end first, because implementation of the front end is quite challenging or quite tricky. But the backend is really easy, and that is what we'll be doing in the last bit of this video. So let's hop over to our Visual Studio Code editor, and in here I have our project, the last one that we did in our last video, and I just have the server running, localhost port 3000. And go to home, login, and all that. Okay, so if I can just close out everything, Now we have this, we have our components, and this is our project structure. Now with the Redux, what we need to do is inside our store, we'll need to create a new inside our source folder, we'll need to create a new folder, which is store. Now, the store is essentially what Redux uses to maintain the state of the entire application. Now, inside the store, we'll store the actions and the reducers, which we'll see in a moment. So, inside the store, let's create two folders. One is the actions folder, and also I'll create a new folder, which is inside store, create a new folder, call it reducers. Now, inside actions, let's go ahead and create some files there. And one of those files is action types. And what these are just basic action types, as we'll see in a moment. And inside the actions, and I'll also create another file which I'll call auth.js. And inside the reducers, you'll need to create a file which is identical to the actions in the actions folder, so auth.js as well. So we have the auth.js in the reducers and the auth.js in the actions. So let's start off with the action types. Now in here, essentially the action types are basic. They're just action types, which, as we'll see in a moment, they are just some functions or some constants that enable us while fasting not to keep typing the same thing over and over again. But these are basic types that alert us that specific actions have been dispatched or some specific actions have been run, as you'll see. So one of the first action that we'll need to create, or the action type that we need to create, is auth start, and it is just the string itself, so auth start as well. And we are going to mimic the entire or the structure of the authentication process, as auth start will alert us that the authentication process has started. Auth success will alert us that this authentication process was a success. Auth fail, and we'll have an auth logout like that. So we have our action types there: auth start, auth success, fail, and logout. And these essentially are the types of the actions that are going to be dispatched by our application. So we hop over to our auth.js, and we need to import all those action types. So let's import. We can import all of them as, let's say, import star as action types, and we can import that from, and that is in / action types, like that. And we'll be posting some data, so we need to import Axios. So import Axios from Axios, like that. Now we start off by creating our first action. Now the first action, as you remember, it was auth start. So let's export another constant here, and I'll call it auth start, which is essentially the action that will be dispatched with the type of auth start. So auth start, it will be constant that takes in no parameters, and will return an object there, and this object needs to have some parameters for it to be rendered out correctly or to be dispatched correctly, and one of them is the type, and that comes from our action types dot, and it is auth start. So that is the basic structure. Then we'll export another one and call it auth success. Now for a successful login, since we'll be using Django REST auth, now Django REST auth, when you log in successfully, it gives you a token which it uses to identify that specific user. So we need to pass in our token in there. We have our token in there, and as you remember, we need to return an object of type, and that comes from action types dot success. Save everything, And as an optional or as another parameter that we need to pass into this constant here, I forgot const, it is our token. So we can do our token and do token, but we can just do it shorthand ES6 syntax as token like that. So I'm going to copy this down again, and I'll call it so if we are successful, let's say for the case of fail, we'll have an error, and we need to dispatch auth fail, and we'll pass in our error like that. Oops. So save everything. Now auth logout, we're going to create it in a moment, but let's go ahead and create another constant again, or another uh, function. So we are going to export a constant, and we call that auth or auth login. Now to log in a user, you'll need a username and a password. Now I'm doing this in hindsight of knowing what these parameters are, because I've worked with it in a while, but you can just go ahead and set it up like this or with your own parameters, and when you set up the backend, you'll get a hint of what you'll not to use as your parameters, but they need to be the username and the password. So as we've exported our constant login, we need to return dispatch, and this is an arrow function like that. Will dispatch an object, and in that object it is where we are going to perform our logic of logging in a user. Now as I said, we'll be using Axios, and you can use any package that you like. You can also use fetch, but I like to use Axios. So in here we'll do axios.post, and in there we'll pass in our URL, which is http 127.0.0.1 port 8000, and that is the Django port. So we'll go to REST auth, then login. Now this URL, it is the URL that Django uses to authenticate these users. Now as I said, I'm doing this in hindsight of knowing what the URL already is, but you can just go ahead and set up a URL, but when you set up the backend, you'll get a sneak peek of what the URL will be. Now the data that we're sending, it is the username, so sending our username and our password like that. Now we can do this shorthand ES6 syntax like that, and this is a post request which will give us a promise. So then with the result, we are going to do some checking or some logic there. Now we'll grab the token that we get from the response data, and that will be rest.data.key, and that is what it calls it. That is what rest calls that. We have our key. Now we'll need to create an expiration date, since this will be some sort of session, but we're not using session. So we are creating a session of 1 hour for each user. Now this is not sessions, as I said, but let's go ahead and create an expiration date. That will be new date, and inside there we need to call again new date like that. Dot get we need to get the time, and after that we need to add an hour to that, so plus 3600 seconds. Then we need to multiply with 1000 to convert that into milliseconds. So we have our token and our expiration date. Now we need to set that in local storage. Now you can set this in cookies or some sort of index DB, but local storage will do just fine. So we'll call local storage dot set item, and in the first parameter that we pass in the set item build method, it is the key and then the value of that item. So we'll set the local storage, we'll set the token and the expiration date like that. Now we'll need to catch an error if we have any, and if we catch an error we'll need to dispatch or fail like that. Now before we post this data, we'll need to also dispatch another action, which is auth start. Well, that just means that whenever we hit this auth or we hit this route, we'll need to, or whenever this auth login function is dispatched, the first thing to do is to alert us that the authentication process has begun, and if we get an error, we'll dispatch auth fail, and we'll need to pass in the error as well. If you remember, auth fail took in the error and it returns the error itself. Now, when the user logs in, we'll need to set a timeout for the expiration date. So we'll create another function that can help us with that, and I'll just call it export const, and that will be set auth timeout, and this takes in the expiration type. Maybe we can pass in the expiration time, and in there we need to return also a dispatch, since we'll be dispatching specific actions to alert us of specific moments. Now in there we can set the timeout, and this timeout inbuilt method, it is a high order, or it takes in a function as another parameter, and inside there, after the function, it is after the timeout, the function will need to pass in the time to wait for the specific action that will specify in here to be completed. So inside here we can pass in the expiration time. If you have used set timeout before, you'll know this. So we need to pass in expiration time and multiply that with 1000 to convert that into milliseconds. Now when the timeout reaches, that is after the expiration time of 1 hour, when it reaches, inside here we'll need to dispatch another action, which will be auth logout, that will create in a moment. Now, so save everything. Now when we set everything in the local storage, we also need to dispatch set auth timeout, so that it sets the timeout of that session. So we'll dispatch set auth timeout, and it takes in the expiration time, which is just 3600 seconds. So save everything. Now after a successful login, we'll need to redirect to the home page. So we can just do window.application dot place, and we can put in the URL to replace to. Now you can do replace or href depending on your preference. Now replace will just replace the entire URL with the home page, so everything will be pushed to the home page. Now we can call that on there. Now let's go ahead and create our auth logout, which is just simple. We'll export our const of auth logout like that. Takes in no params, and it returns an object like the other actions at the top, and the first parameter is the type of that object, which will be action types dot auth logout like that. Now if for us to successfully log out a user, we'll need to remove that information that we set in the local storage. So to remove information from the local storage, we'll just call it storage dot remove item, and we can pass in the key of that item, which was token, and the other one was expiration date, like that. So save everything. And once this auth logout is dispatched, it will remove all those items that are set in the local storage. Now, if we catch an error, we'll dispatch auth fail. Now that looks fine. Let's go ahead and create another method for auth sign up, which is going to look exactly the same as this. So if let me toggle off the terminal again. Now, this function here, we are going to call it auth sign up, like that. Now, to sign up a user, you'll need a username, an email. Now, with Django or with REST auth, it requires that you have two passwords, which is the first password and then the confirmation of that same password, which it calls password 2. So let's just do password 2, like that. Save everything. Now we'll dispatch auth start and we'll call Axios.post. We are going to post on this URL, and it is the local host port 8000 REST auth, and it is registration like that. And the data that we are posting, it is the username, the email, that, then password 1 and password 2, like that. You can add commas there, get rid of the error. Now this will return as a promise. So with the response, we'll get the token from the data. Then we'll create an expiration date, which is just the same. After a successful sign up, we'll redirect to the homepage, and we make sure that we catch an error if we find or if we encounter any. Now we can abstract this method to another function, if you will, because we are repeating it in two places. But that is a challenge for you. You can go ahead and do it. Now, when a user signs up, we'll need to check the authentication state. What I mean by this is we'll need to check the local storage and see, for example, if you closed your browser and you come back, we'll need to check the local storage and see if the token is still there and the expiration date. If they are not there, we'll dispatch some actions and we'll see how we can handle that. So to handle that, we're going to create another constant here, and we are going to call it let's say auth. We are going to check the state of the authentication or the authentication state of the application. So auth check state. Now this is going to take in no parameters as well, and we'll return a dispatch as well. Now we'll need to get the item or the token itself from the local storage. So constant token is local storage dot. We are going to get the item, choose token as we saved it. Now if we have our token, so we're going to check. First of all, if a user opens the browser or opens the application and we check for the token that is stored in the local storage. Now if the token is not there, we're going to dispatch auth logout. So let's go ahead and handle that. So if our token is let's say undefined, if it's not there or if it is null, I'm just going to cover all the situations. So if the token is null, like that, what we're going to do is we'll dispatch auth logout, and when we dispatch auth logout, if we check, it will just go ahead and redirect us to the logout page. So I'm getting a lag there. Okay. So if the token is undefined and the token is null, we'll dispatch auth logout. Else, that means that we have our token, The next parameter that we need to check is the expiration date. So we'll grab the expiration date as well from the local storage. So expiration date, it is new date. We'll need to create a new date instance of the expiration date. So new date of local storage dot, we are getting the item of expiration date. So we have our expiration date from the local storage like that, and we need to check if our expiration date is less than the new date, or if we check our expiration date, for example, right now is 2339. If the expiration date is less than right now or equal to right now, we'll need to log that user out. So what you need to do is check if our expiration date it is less than or equal to new date, which is right now. What we need to do is also will dispatch logout like that. Else, if the expiration date is in the future, now we'll need to dispatch auth success, meaning we are still logged in. So we'll dispatch auth success. And remember, auth success takes in the token that we got from the local storage. Now, after dispatching auth success, we also need to set the timeout. Now, we are going to dispatch the function was set auth timeout. Now, to create an instance of a timeout instance of the expiration date, what we're going to do is we are going to get the expiration date. So we'll do expiration date dot get time like that, and we'll subtract that from the new date. So we'll subtract right now from the expiration date dot get time as well, dot get time, and this will return us the time in seconds. So we'll need to, or in milliseconds, so we'll need to divide that by 1000. If you remember, if we go up a little, auth set auth timeout takes the expiration time in seconds, then it converts that to milliseconds as well. So we just need to make sure that the brackets are at the right places, and if we save everything now, this should do it. But this is going easy, it isn't not going to work out just as well. Now we have our actions there. If we go to reducers, now we first thing to do is we'll import our action types. So import star as action types, and that is from dot slash actions action types. Save that. Now for inside our reducer, now what our reducer does exactly is it takes the state and figures out exactly what we want from the state and returns the piece of the state that we want exactly. So in simple terms is if we have a loading property in the state, if we dispatch this action auth start, it will figure out the state and return the value of that state that we defined. Now, to do that, instead of figuring out or changing the values of the state in our functions in here, we'll need to create a helper method that will enable us to check our state, figure out how our state is, and return the state with some updated properties, or return the property of the state that we want. Now, inside the store, I'm going to create another file, call it details.js, and you can just call this anything. And in there, I'm going to export constant and call it update object. And what this does is it takes in the old object which is just our state, and it takes in the updated properties. Now, what this should do, it should return basically the old object, and it should return it with the updated properties. And I'm just using the spread operator there. So our update object, it is the method that we're going to use so that we can return the piece of the state that we want, because remember, this is a global state for the entire application. Now, for the auth, we'll start by exporting another constant here and call it auth start, and we need this to be synonymous with the names of the actions that we created in the actions auth. So auth start takes in the state and the action itself. So this auth start, it is synonymous to the action that we created here, which is auth start. So it takes in the state and the action, and in there we need to return the updated object of the state, or the updated part of the state that we need. Now we'll need to import our method that we just created inside our utils, which is this update object. So if I can just come back, and we need to import update object, and that comes from dot slash. We need to go back on the folder, and we'll need to return update object, and we are returning an updated object of the state. And the updated properties that we want is, if we are starting the authentication process, we'll need to have a loading property which is initially true. Now that needs, or that calls for us to create a global state, and we'll just call it initial state, and in there we can have loading, which is false. We can have an error property, which is null, and we can have the token that will be returned to us with Django REST auth, which will be initially null. Now for all start, we'll need loading, and set that to true. We'll set the error to null since we're still loading, or we have just begun the authentication process. Now we are going to export the constant auth start. We are going to create this for all those actions that we have there. We had auth success, takes in the state and the action. Now we return also an updated object of the state. Now since you are successfully logged in, we need to set back loading to false, and this will just come in quite handy when we'll be, or to come in handy when we'll be displaying the spinner there. And since we are logged in, we have our token, and the token will come from the action. So action dot token, like that. So save everything, and we can create fail. And right now, as you guessed it, it will also return text in the state, and the action returns an update object of the state with the updated properties as loading. We can get rid of loading there, and the error will just come from the action dot error, like that. Now we'll need to create another last one for the auth logout, and yeah, so auth logout, text in the state, same thing. Now for the logout, since we are logging out a user, we'll need to remove the token from the local storage. If you remember, for the action, we were removing the token from the local storage. Now inside here, from our state, the token will just be null since we are logged out. Now, since we have our actions that are synonymous to the or we have our reducers, which are synonymous to the actions that we created in our action, we'll need to create our root reducer. So let's create our constant of reducer as well. Takes in the same thing, state. Now for the reducer, the state will be the initial state, and then it takes in the action as well. And inside there, we'll return, or we are going to switch on the action dot type, since we have several actions, so we can't just return a specific action. We'll need to go through those actions and specify the case for each action. Now we'll switch on the action type, and for the case of, remember we had our action types, so action types dot auth start, we are going to return auth start, and we pass in the state and the action as well. So we'll need to create this for all those. Now this will need to auth success, and that is auth success. For auth fail, we'll dispatch or return auth fail, and for auth logout, we are going to return auth logout as well. Now, an important factor, or it is important that we return the default case, which is now for the default case, we'll just return the initial state as it is. Since if we don't return this, if we don't return the initial state, now we might get away with that, but we are going to get an error in the future, so we might just as well as return the default case there. So we can export the default as that reducer. So export default reducer, save everything. Now we have our actions, we have our action types, or we have our actions and our reducers. So what we need to do is to import our reducer inside our index.js so that we can create the store for the entire application. Now to do this, let's start by importing the reducer. And you can call this anything. So since we exported it as a default, we can name it anything. We are importing that from /store, importing that from the store, reducers auth like that, and you can go ahead and create a constant of store. And to create a store, Redux has this inbuilt method, which is create store, that we're going to import in a moment. But what I'm just realizing right now is I didn't mention the packages or the dependencies that I'm using. Now, for this, what you're using is Axios. Now you saw Axios. We are using Axios, so make sure you install Axios, React Redux, React Router DOM, and React Script, React Redux itself, and Redux Tank. Now I'll make sure I link this to the GitHub repo so that you can just clone or download this. And if you run npm install, it will just install these dependencies for your application. Now let's go ahead and grab that from our Redux, and we'll import some components from Redux as well. So we are going to import that from Redux, and the first thing we are going to import from Redux is create store. Then we'll need apply middleware and compose, but this will come in later. So to create the store, we'll need to pass in create store, and for create store takes in a reducer, as you can see, as the first argument, and we have the enhancer. So let's pass in our reducer, and what happened there? So we have our reducer there, and for the enhancer, we are going to create it in a moment. So let's create a constant of for the enhancer, we'll have, and the code is quite weird for the enhancer there, so I'm just going to type it in and then I'll explain. So we are going to get the window, and then we'll get the Redux Devtools Extension compose. Otherwise, we'll just use the compose that we imported there. Now, what this does is, for the enhancer, it checks if we have this Redux Devtools extension installed, and it checks the compose of that Redux Devtools of that extension. Now, if we don't have the extension installed locally, it will just use the compose as the enhancer from the Redux itself. Now, we are going to see how to install that extension in a bit, so don't worry about that. Now, as you remember, in the credit store text, they reduce as the first argument, and then the enhancer, if any. So our enhancer is compose enhancers. We have our enhancers there, and for the enhancer, we'll need to pass in our middleware to see, or to enable Redux to serve our store properly. So inside the enhancer, we'll apply our middleware. Now, Redux has this method called thank, which you can just pass in inside the apply middleware, which will just take care of the middleware itself. So we can import the thank, and that comes from Redux, no, Redux thank. That comes from Redux thank, and we can just pass in thank right there. So we have our store. Now, to link the store to our entire application, we'll need to wrap our application inside the provider that comes from React Redux. Now, the provider enables Redux to talk with our application so that we can link our store to our application as such. So you can import the provider, and you can just search for it, provider. What? So let's import it as well. So we can import a provider, and that comes from React Redux. Provider as well. Now I'm going to abstract this app into a constant of app itself. So constant app, it is going to be like that, and inside there we have our provider that is basically a wrapper around our application. So we can cut out everything in there, paste it there, save. Let's turn this into a React application like that. So if I save, and I'll need to pass in up right there. So if I save, we get everything auto formatted correctly. Now for the provider, it takes in the store, which is just the store that we created up top. So everything looks nice right now. Now what you need to do is to go and get that extension. If you hop over to your browser and just type in Redux DevTools. Now, depending on your browser, if you're using Google Chrome or Firefox, now I must say that this is only available for Firefox and Google Chrome, I think. So make sure you're installing it for your correct browser. So I'm on Chrome, so I already have it installed, and if you have it installed, you'll see it as this little icon here with circles like this. Yeah. Now, what this extension does is it provides you with some sort of GUI. If I can just show you, if you go to our local host and refresh, now if I inspect the page, if we go to Redux, now we see we get this GUI. Now nothing is happening right now, but we'll see how we can use it in a bit. Let's hop over to our application, and now everything looks fine. And close off all those files. If we go to our layout now, to link our application or our layout to the state of our entire application, Redux or React Redux comes with this handy method, which is the connect. And let's just do importing that from React Redux. And what we need to import is connect. And what you can just come back down here is if we do connect and pass in connect and wrap it around the application, the default export of application, it now enables us to specify some methods such as mapping our state to props. So we can take our state and map it to our props so that we can access it inside our application, or we can map some dispatch, or we can map the dispatch to some specific actions inside our props. So we'll see that in a moment, but what I'm going to do is convert this to a class-based component. So this was layout. So class layout sends react.component like that. Then we have the render method, and inside the render we can return basically this div here. So I'm going to cut that div, make sure I return it there, and get rid of the function-based component. Save everything, turn this to a React application, and we can grab a piece of the state that we need from the global state by mapping our state to the props. So let's create some constants here, map state to props. Oops. And what that does is takes in the state, and inside here we can return an object, and the key or the property that you need to return is if we are authenticated. We need to check if we are authenticated. So authenticated. Now you can call this anything, maybe is authenticated, whatever. So if you're authenticated, now we're going to compare that with the state. We're going to check the token and compare that with null. So what this is going to check is if you're authenticated, we'll have our token. If you're not authenticated, it'll just be null. Now, this map state props is the first parameter that we need to pass inside our connect. Now, the second parameter is map dispatch to props, but we're going to see that in a moment. So if we map our state to props, now we have access to this authenticated property or authenticated piece of our state as a prop. Now, if we are authenticated, and I'm just going to do a conditional here and check. So if this props dot authenticated, meaning we are authenticated, now what I need to do is display a menu item, and that will just say logout like that, and we can get rid of as H as A. Otherwise, we can display these two links in here, and we'll need to wrap that in a React fragment, and you can just use this shorthand syntax there. If we save everything, it gets auto formatted correctly, and if we refresh, props is not defined, line 45. If we check props, now we change this to a class-based component. Now that needs to be this .props.children, which are the children that we wrapped around the layout. So If we come back and check, we are not authenticated, so these are the links that we show. Now, whenever a user clicks or whenever this component is mounted, meaning it's being inserted into the DOM, we need to check if the user is authenticated. Now, we can check that by a method that we can grab from our store, but to get that method and connect it with the application, we'll need to create a map dispatch to props so that we can map the dispatch of that event to that action to our properties. So we can create a constant of map dispatch to props. And let me see, is it spelled like that? Map dispatch to props like that. Sorry, forgot the spelling. Haven't done it in a while, in a bit. So it will text in the dispatch, and inside there we are going to return an object as well. Now the key, we can call it anything. I'll just call it on load, and it will be an anonymous function that will just dispatch. And the action that we need to dispatch is, if we check into our auth, into our actions auth, we created this action which is auth check state. So if we copy that action, we need to import it inside our layout. So import and do importing that from /store /actions/auth, like that. Save everything, and that is auth check state. If we copy that, come back, we'll need to dispatch auth check state and text in our parameters as we saw. Now what happens is, anytime the layout is rendered, meaning it is mounted, it's being inserted into the DOM, we have this life cycle method which is component did mount. So every time the component mounts, we are going to call this dot props dot on load. Now it needs to be a callable function like that, so we are going to call it like that. And what this is going to do is, it is going to check if we are authenticated, and it will grab the token from the local storage. Otherwise it will just go ahead and dispatch logout and go through with the logic as we saw. Now if we come back and check, this .props.onload is not a function. Now what you need to do is something which I forgot. Now map dispatch to props is the other parameter that we need to, or the other argument that we pass in to connect. So if we save, refresh, now we see that we are still logged out. Now if we look at the extension, now we see the action which is being dispatched, it is auth logout. Now this is the need of creating our action types. So the type of action that is being dispatched, it is auth logout. So you can jump to that action. If you have more actions down here, you can jump to specific actions, or you can skip. So let's refresh. Now you see the action is still auth logout. If we check our state, we are not loading, we don't have an error, and the token is null. So the action type is logout like that. So you can go ahead and play around with this tool, which is quite handy in debugging your Redux application. So that will do it for our layout. Now what we need to do is set up the login page, so that when we log in right here, we can send that data to our backend and log us in. Now let's go to login, and first thing I'll start by removing that and converting this to a class-based component. So class login extends react dot component, render method there, and inside there we can return basically this grid here. So I'll cut that grid, make sure that is what we're returning, get rid of the export there, so save everything. Now that should still work. If we come back and check, now if we type in something here, we'll need to store this data somehow in the state of our applications so that we can post it to our backend. Now I'm just going to create the state, and inside the state we'll have our username. Now this is not necessary, but it is necessary so that you have these values that are controlled from the beginning. Now you might get an error if you don't output this, or if you don't create the state in here. If you just create the values on the fly, you'll get an error saying that the state or the values in the state are uncontrolled. So we can also go ahead and grab the values from the state. So constant get our username, password, and those come from this dot state, like that. Now for the input, we have the first input. I'll change the placeholder to username. Now we are going to need to give it a name prop, which is username, and we'll give it a value, which is that username that comes from the state. Now I'm going to copy all that, paste that there, change this to password. So password like that. Placeholder is password. Then we have our button, which is just going to log us in. Refresh. Username. Oops, I did a mistake. Oops, why did I think it's writing a lot of Python? So refresh. Now we should still have our login form right there. But as you can see, nothing is happening. I can't type. So we'll need an onChange method there. So let's go ahead and create a method which will just check. So handle change, an anonymous function, takes in an event, not an anonymous. And inside there, we'll also need to, what you can do is just say this dot. We can set the state, and inside the state, we can say e dot target dot name, set that to the value. So e dot target dot value, like that. Now we'll need to create an onChange prop for all of this. So onChange is this dot under change, copy that, paste that there, and before we set the state, or yeah, we can just do like that. Or what we can do is, after that, we can console log the state to see how it looks like. State is not defined. So we can console log this to state there. If we hop over to our console and do something there, as you can see, as I continue to type, we are logging out this state right there. So our onChange method is working correctly. We can get rid of that, and those values are being populated to our state. Now, to log a user in, remember we created that action which was auth login. So to use this action, we need to import it from our store, and that is simple. So we can import and that is from our store actions auth, and the action that we need to import is auth login. So we can save everything. Now, to link that action to the prop, we'll need to connect our application the same way we connected our layout. So down here, we can copy pretty much everything there, paste it there, cut out that, paste it there, cut that, and we'll need to import connect, and connect comes from React Redux. So connect. Now our map state to props, we don't need the state, but we can still get some values from the state, such as error, which was come from state.error, and we can also have loading, which also comes from state.loading as well. So for our property or our action, we'll need to dispatch auth login, and I'll just call it login as well. Now for our form, when we submit our form, we'll need to change the button type to submit. Now when we submit our form, we'll need to create a handle submit method that will handle submission of that data to our backend. So handle submit takes in no parameters, and we need to grab our values from the state as well, since those are the values that we'll be posting. Then we can call our props. So these are props.login, and for the login takes in the username and the password as well. Now in here we need to make sure that we're passing in the same parameters. So username and password as well. So save everything, and on login, on handle submit, it will just call this.props.login, and we pass in our username and password. We have access to the event. Now first thing we need to do, event prevent default, which will just prevent the default from happening and prevent the page from refreshing. So we'll prevent the default, then we'll call this props.login, then it will log us in, and after that let's go hop over to our backend. Now I just realized that I had not linked up the backend, so I had to pause the video and create this project here. So we have our Django project, we have our settings.py file, and get rid of the comments there, get rid of all those. Now if we hop over to the backend, now the backend is really easy to set up. So if we go to this repository here, now as you saw, these are the libraries and frameworks that we'll be using. One of them is the Django REST framework, and we have the Django REST framework as well, Django REST auth. So let's hop over to Django REST framework here. Now if you click on installation, all you need to do is just type in pip install Django REST framework, and need to add REST framework as an installed app. So under installed apps, I already have REST framework installed. So just paste it there and give it a space so that that is obviously that it was added. So we need to add REST framework as an installed app. Now, if we go to the authentication part or the authentication API reference, now we are going to be using token authentication. Now, before we go to token authentication, we need to add this REST framework authentication default authentication classes. So head over to the bottom, paste that there, and we are not going to be using session authentication. Instead, we'll be using token authentication, and we need to make sure that we add REST framework.auth token as an installed application. So copy that, replace basic authentication with token authentication like that. Now that will do it for REST framework. You can go ahead and close off this. Now another cool package that we'll be using is Django Auth, but before that, let's deal with REST Auth first. Now for REST Auth, if we go to installation, now all you need to do is also pip install the Django REST Auth. What did I do? Come back. So pip install Django REST Auth, and we can add that to our installed apps. So scroll up to install apps, paste that there. REST framework is already there, so we can get rid of that, get rid of the comment, add that there, add the comma, and after that we'll need to add this to our URL patterns. So if I copy that and open our URLs, get rid of that, and we can convert that to our path, and we'll need to make sure that we are importing the include function up top there. So any URL that goes to REST auth slash, as you remember, that is the URL that the URL that we are posting to. Now after that, all we need to do is run python manage.py migrate. But before we migrate, since we'll be doing registration, we also need to add this to our installed apps, and that is where Django Auth comes in. So if we copy that and go to our settings, installed apps, we need Django contrib sites, put that at the top there. We need all of account, REST auth registration, and we can add these URL patterns to our URLs. So can get rid of this duplicate, make sure we get that, and make sure include is imported. Save everything. If we come back, we'll need to add site ID, copy that. If we go to install apps, we can add our site ID. Now if you are doing social authentication, you'll need to add social account. So if you need me to do another video of social authentication, you can just let me know, and I'll move that up top, move all of up top, and all the social account up top like that. So just moving the files around. So we go to Django Auth first, pip install Django Auth. I already have it installed. We'll need our authentication backends, so grab those real quick. Go to your settings, paste them there, get rid of the comments. Under installed apps, we'll need to add those apps there, and I believe those are already there. So if we go, contrib sites is there, all of dot account is there, social account is there. So we're getting this error in our views, and we need to convert that to a path. Sorry about that. And if we come back, Now we already added our site ID. Now all we need to do is add in our path. So we can go and add in our path as well. So any path going to up to and including /accounts, it will just include all of .accounts. So we have that, and what you need to do is run python manage.py migrate. So we have our migrations applied. Now all you need to do is, if we try now to send some data to the backend, it will not go through, and that is because of cross-origin resource sharing. So we need to install course headers and make sure we have course headers as an installed app, and add the course headers middleware to our application. So we can put course headers there, go back, add course headers middleware. That needs to be on top of that. And for the configuration, if we have some configuration variables here. We can set up a cross origin allow all. We can set up a whitelist so that we can allow some requests from certain domains or some certain lists. Now I'm just going to allow requests from anywhere, and can do that there. Set that to true, not a tuple. So think that is going to do it. And if we go to a terminal here and migrate again, we see no migrations apply. We didn't need to do that, but I just had to run those migrations there. So at this point our backend is almost set, and we'll need to just configure our Django all a bit. And what I'm looking for is account email required, and this is so that we don't get any errors, or we don't get Django all of validating the email that the user is submitting. So account email required, we'll set that to false. And account email verification, we can set that to none. As you can see, we have options there: mandatory, optional, and none. I set that to optional there, or none. I mean, that should be none, not optional. And we can do the account authentication method as the username. So we can copy that, and we can leave the others to the default values that they are. So save everything, and if we try to migrate to see if there are any changes that are to be applied, no changes to be applied. That looks good. So we can go ahead and see if we can post some data to our backend. So everything looks fine. We have that. We have our application. If we refresh, we should be able to log in right now, hopefully. Now another thing, if I can check, we don't have our server running. So if we run our server, python manage.py run server, and I had a typo there, so run server, that should run our server. So if we click to go to our local hosts, and we see page not found, and that's okay. So if we go to rest of /login, which is the URL that we defined, now we see we are getting in we're getting this kind of an admin interface. But first thing, we need to go ahead and create a super user so that we can log in, and that needs to be manage.py create super user. give them a name, an email, a password, and our super user was created successfully. So we can go ahead and run our server again and see if we logged in. Now, if we refresh the login page, we should be able to log in with the username that we just created. So if we make a post request, now we see we get this key, and as you remember, this is the key that REST returns to us, which is essentially our token. So if we go to the admin panel and check on tokens, we see we have this token and it is associated with the user that we've just created right now. So let's go over and try to log in here. And I had a typo. If we log in and nothing is happening, so if we refresh, and oh yeah, it's because if we go back to the front end now, we are done with the backend as such. If we get any errors, we can just fix them as we go by. So if we go to the login, we created an onSubmit method, but we did not link it to the form itself. So this handle submit method, we can copy it. Now if we go to the form, we can say an onSubmit. So onSubmit equals to this dot handle submit. And I need to change that to React. So we have our onSubmit method linked up, and we should see. Let's refresh and see how that goes. So let's go ahead and log in again. And if we log in, and we're getting an internal server error. And if we check, you call this URL appended slash, and that is just fix in the URLs. So sorry about these mistakes. If we go to the actions, now we have this URL. Now if you just post to /login, you remember we went to restore the /login, then a slash at the end, and we need to do the same thing for the registration as well. So if we do login again, now we see we are redirected to the home page. Now we can go ahead and log out. So if we check our Redux there, and I opened the wrong one. So if we check our Redux Devtools extension, we see it was auth success, and we have our action type auth success, and we have our token which is being passed in there. And we can go ahead and display the spinner there, and we can start by adding in the functionality of logging out. So can close that. Now let's start by the layout, and we can do a logout. And what that will do is it will dispatch this action that we created inside the auth, which is the auth logout action. So we can copy that, and inside layout we'll need to auth check state, and then auth logout as well. Now for our mob dispatch to props, the logout will be an anonymous function that will dispatch auth logout as well. So check out that. Now what you need to do is, if we are logged in on the menu item which says logout, an on click, can add an on click there and just do an anonymous function. or we can just do this.props dot logout like that. So we can save everything, and let me just do an anonymous function that we call this.props.logout to log us out. So if we refresh, now we see it is auth success. If we click that button, we see we are logged out and the token changed from the token that we have to null. If we refresh again, we'll be logged out automatically. So let's go ahead and log in, but before we log in, we'll need to display the spinner there. And let's go to the login. We have loading grabbed from the state, and in here we can access it by saying const of loading comes from the props, so this dot props, and inside the button we can display a loading property which will be equal to that loading. So if it is loading, then we are loading. So if we go to login, and we can log in right now, and if we click login, we have a spinner displaying there for a second, and we are logged in. So we have the spinner displaying out correctly. I can just show you out again. And if we log in, we have the spin, and we cannot click it, so it is disabled. We can do disabled equals to loading. So loading equals loading and disabled equals loading. Those are the new props that we can add in there. Now we can go ahead and create the sign-in method really quick. Inside the components, we can start by creating a new component, which is signup.js, and inside the signup, I'll do RCE, hit tab. We have a class of signup which just extends react.component. We have the render, and we are exporting it as the default. Now inside our roots, we can import signup and another root which goes to slash signup, and using the signup component, save everything. If we close our roots, now I'll go with everything that is inside the login. So I'll copy everything inside signup, paste it there, and this needs to be signup like that. Signup. So we have auth login. We can import auth signup as well, and we have it connected to our application, and we can call it this method here, signup, which takes in the username, password one, and email. Excuse me. So we have the username, the email, the password one, and the password two. So save everything. We have this method here, signup, which will just dispatch auth signup, which takes in those methods there. Now the handle change remains the same. The handle submit takes in the username, the email, which we'll need to add from the state, to add to the state, email, password one, and password two. So we have all those values already controlled in the state, and inside there we can grab them from the state. We can have password 1 and password 2, and this props dot sign up, and we are signing up basically everything in here. So save all that. We have render, and we'll need to grab all those values from the state. So we have email, password, and the rest. Now I'm going to create some input fields. So we have the input of the username, we'll create another input field with the value of email, placeholder of email address, the icon and do mail, and this will be password 1. And the placeholder is password. That's nice. And we can do another one, which is password 2. And the placeholder, it will be confirm password, or confirm your password, like that. And we have our button, we have loading, which comes from the state, and we are signing up a new user. So if we refresh now, if we log out and hit sign up, and that needs to change. Problems of copy pasting. So sign up for a new account. Now if they are new to us, and this needs to change to already have an account, then this will go to login, and we can change this to we can auto import the link there. The to property, which is slash login, save everything. If we head over to login, need to us, we can auto import the link like that. And that goes to slash sign up as well. So if you're new to us, then go ahead and sign up for a new account. So let's go ahead and check that out. So sign up and login. So let's try to sign up a new user. Yes, we can type in. If you go to sign up, let's double check. We have our method, which is handle submit. We have our handle change, which is looking nice. So if we refresh, now let's sign up a new user, and I'll call it test user and info.com. Give them a password, confirm the same password. Then if we log in, we see loading and we are signed up. So if we refresh our tokens, now we see we have new users being created. So we have test user and the user that we created just right now. So I think that is pretty much the basic or the core functionality of the site. What you can do right now is handle any errors. So for example, if we go ahead and log out, and if we try to log in with a password that does not exist, we see we are getting an error. And if we get an error, request failed, with a lot of that. So we see loading is still loading, and we need to go ahead and fix that. So inside our actions, auth, and that was inside our reducers. So inside our reducers, auth. So if we fail, we get our error, and we'll need to set back loading. We'll need to set back that to false, and that should take care of that error. And we can close utility. So what I wanted to show you is if we log in like that, then we see we are getting this error, and we need to grab this error from the state and display it to our user. So I'll grab a message component from Semantic UI so that we can finish off this. And one last touch is if we go to our actions, auth. Now, if there is a failure, where is it? Where is it? Where is it? If we catch an error, we'll dispatch auth fail, and we'll need to redirect. So let me copy that, paste it there, and oops. So if we save everything, now for the registration, we'll need to redirect to sign up, since we'll be getting that error from the sign up page, and that will need to redirect to the login page. So what I mean by that is if we get this error, now we see we're redirected back to the login page, and that error is gone. So what you can do is if we go to Semantic UI, check for our form. Now we can look for a form message, something like this. So if we have an error, if you click on try it, basically it is this message component here. Copied that wrong, so copy that. If you come back to our login form, and where I want to display the message is if I check, we want to display the error message right above the button itself. So we can go back above the button and display the message. So make sure we have a message imported from Semantic UI, which it is, and that's nice. So we have our message, and it's an error message. The header, we can change that to there was an error, and the content is enable login, please try again, like that. So we'll get that error message, and we are going to only display that error if there is an error, and the error will come from our prop. So we have loading, and we can grab error, and what you can do is if we have an error, so error and then we are going to display the message as well. So you can save that. So if we have an error, we'll display the message like that, and we are getting the error from the state. So make sure we're getting the error from the state like that. So if we get that, So unfortunately, I've ran into a bug which has really taken out of my time. So the message component on the form wasn't rendering out correctly. Now I just went ahead and copied the message component itself, and let's see if that will render out. So if we have an error and we'll display the message there and say there was an error. So there was an error, and for the content of that error, we'll just say unable to log in. Please try again, like that. So I hope that works. So if we come back to our page and refresh, now for the login page, if we try something that doesn't exist, now we see we are getting this error and we are redirected back to the login page. So if we log in with a user that exists and a password that exists, like that, then if we log in, then we should be redirected to the home page. So let's go ahead and log out, and we can do the same for the sign up page. We can copy the error message, copy that, go into sign up, right above the button, and we need to make sure that we are grabbing the error from the state, which we are. Now we have loading, and using the structuring, we can get the error from the props. So if we have the error and we need to change, there was an error, unable to sign up, please check your credentials, like that. So maybe it was a mismatch of the password, so we'll just tell the user to check their credentials. I think that is a nice message to display to the user. So we'll check that, type an email, so at something something, type a password that doesn't match. If we sign up, we are getting the error, unable to sign up, please check your credentials. And that is our little validation there. Of course, this is not that great, or we could check the length of the value of the password. If it matches some certain characters, we could filter out some characters, and that is something which you can go ahead and implement in your own project. But in this, I just wanted to put up a simple project where I can show you how we can use a state manager to authenticate ourselves. So if we go to login and check, now we see we are logged in, and yeah, that is it. So if we check our Devtools extension, now there are a lot of tabs in here which honestly I don't know what they do, but you can go ahead and mess with this around and check around if you can use this. You can jump to, or you can skip that. If we skip that, as you can see, we are logged out. So if we jump to auth success, then we should be logged in as such. So if we jump, so these are those actions, as you can see. So let's log in, and there was an error. If we log in, now there's no error. So I think this is going to do it for this video. So thank you for watching this video. If you liked it, make sure you subscribe, leave a comment down below, let me know what you think. Make sure you drop a like, and stay along for more videos. I'll see you in the next video.